Hi everybody, I'm David and this is All Things Sacred. So last we were talking about the air suit, the sword suit, the suit of the mind. Most people would say, and that's really what the swords are about. They're all mental. They're all about dissecting and analyzing, and the tools of the mind, doing what the mind is good at. When you're talking about it on a cosmic scale, then we have the Ace of Swords we were talking about is the cosmic intelligence, the seed for the plan of creation that is found in all forms. It's represented best in the two when things are working in union, in communion with their creator for their dharma, for their purpose, for the reason for their being here. But working with their creator, the soul knows that it has to descend into reality, and that causes great sorrow and anguish and suffering, but also the seed for future meditation, which will cycle it back around so that once in the creation, the mind can then reunite with its creator truly and fully. This is the Four of Swords, the idea that now that the creation has been, the mind has come into it, it's actually existing in its own right, so to say. It's not just in the causal realms, it's actually in the astral realms. The Four of Swords is the idea that there's an unhappy alliance that's made between the soul and the mind to exist in this reality. Not only physical at this point, the four, the solidification has come, but it's still astral. It's still mental, especially in this suit. And this is the unhappy alliance furthered. It continues to be unhappy for both the spirit, which is, as I said in the last video, representing in the reverse pentagram, descending into nature, descending into matter, unhappy because it's getting further and further from its creator, but also the mind is the thing that is feeling the sense of defeat. And now we come to the six. And so the six, Crowley called science, which is a very good name for it in my personal opinion, because it's the idea, at least in the Rider-Waite, it talked about standing in the present, looking back to the past and using the wisdom from the past to create a better future. And the Six of Swords really is the logos and it's the perfected body. Now that the spirit has descended far enough into this creation, it comes into the center of the mind to create a perfect body, a perfect representation of the mind. The mind knows at this point that it's connected to the divine, and it knows also too, so on the one sense it has this Advaitism, where Christ says, I and my Father are one. And so it recognizes itself as the divine, but there's also the bhakti of the devotional aspect of the human being, being a separate individual, an ego, having to work from this ego, and so seeing themselves separate from the divine at the same time. This is the perspective of the sages, to see themselves both absorbed and separate as a servant to their God, to their form of the divine. And as a servant of the divine, the mind is given a task, a mission to achieve, to make the world better. And so here in the Six of Swords, the mind is being used as it should be. It shines bright and it guides forward. It guides forward motion into the universe to accomplish the task of its divine birthright. The issue with this is that because the mind is the creative force in the universe, and it's creating a better world here in the Six of Swords, to create a better world, it has to partake in the creation of an imperfect present and an imperfect path to that better world that gets better and better before that perfection can be found. And the swords, the mind, creates a trap for itself at this point. Eventually the person needs to come back and hold on to this bright light that's found in the six. that connects directly back up into the ace, where one can see the divine intelligence, and they represent themselves as that wisdom from a greater ego than themselves. But until that point occurs, the 6 has to move into the 7. And the 7 is the 7 is a blocking point. The mind creates a roadblock, an obstacle for itself. In the 6 of Swords, by seeing the imperfect, or the steps through imperfection necessary to get to the perfect ideal found in the 6 too, because that's really what the 6 is founded upon, is upon that good ideal. It creates a number of obstacles actually along the way, as represented by the 7. When I'm reading the cards and the 7 of Swords shows up as the first card, I normally will stop a reading at that point, because it means that the person is lying to themselves. And that if a person is lying to themselves, to give them a reading wouldn't be much help, because any advice they would take and distort into whatever it is that suits their needs. That's the real representation of this more mundane card than we've seen in some of the other ones, of the 7 of Swords. And this is caused by actually the good things found in the 6. It's just when the 6 can't hold on to both, and it has to move forward in its temporality, in its linear trappings. When the mind, being trapped by time, tries to create that good world without just actually living good in the present, it moves forward and it creates a trap for itself that it's unable to overcome without a lot of effort, without a lot of pain, and without a lot of suffering. Because at this point, everything is done in the name of progress. It doesn't matter what it is that you're fighting for, whether it's right or wrong. The fact that you found that ideal, you see the goal that is shown in the 6. It seems to be going out again. Okay, there we go. You see the ideal and the goal in the 6, but you forget that the means are just as important, just as proper to take into account whether or not the goal will be good. Because if your means are improper, then the goal itself will suffer. Let me try one thing to help this video out. Sorry about this. Okay, that should help. So yeah, the 6 is that beautiful divine communion with the divine, where one actually enters a state of absorption, where they're able to live with and represent the divine in this life. When it's brought down to the more mundane aspects, it's just saying that you have a good goal, that the path you're following is the correct one, that it's going to be beneficial for you, beneficial for the world, your soul, mind, body, and all parts. But someone gets attached to that goal, and then the 7 appears, which becomes a roadblock, because they're inadequate until that point that they see themselves as reaching that goal, or whatever it is. If they aren't there, then the 7 will become those swords that it's the inner fighting, as you could see on this card. If it'll show, there we go. And yeah, it's the all the small thoughts of the swords fighting against the main self. Just the self is unable to have any say. The main motion, the ideal that was found in the 6 is represented by the big sword, and all these other ideas of how to accomplish it, or even changing it or fighting against it, so that the ideal suffers because the mind fights itself. That's a really difficult aspect of the mind. You can see in this card, I didn't talk about it, although there are the hard shapes, the sharp shapes. They're all, again, now pinwheels. There's a circle that's created by the 6 swords. They hold a cross now instead of a flower representing its connection to the logos, to the body of Christ, to the words that he spoke, because the swords are a representation of communication and words especially. The pinwheels in this card are there, but they're a little bit more extreme, a little bit more off balance. There's still a lot of power for creation here, but the creation is stunted because of the inner turmoil a person goes through when they haven't learned to introspect. Although meditation was found by the soul early on, it has to be refound. It's found in a living form in the 6, but unless it's sustained by a meditative state or furthered by a deep meditative state, then it will just be a glimpse of samadhi, gnosis, enlightenment, because that's what the 6 represents. In the last card, the 7, we ran to an obstacle, but that obstacle now becomes a cage in the 8. The mind itself is the cage that traps the mind, that traps you. The soul, first off, gets bedazzled, as I mentioned before, by all the forms of creation, including the forms of the mind, and is trapped behind these bars. But more than that, too, the mind is trapped with its duty of becoming this cage in the 8. That the mind itself is not free to reason properly, to act properly, to perceive properly, as it has to be this cage to hold the soul in. Because introspection is what is coming soon in the 9, but the mind wants to avoid that as much as possible. Now that it's seen its beautiful ideal in the 6, it thinks itself is great, and it wants to hold on to what it imagines that it would look like without actually experiencing the true self. And that's what the 8 represents, interference. The mind interferes with the soul's mission that it's been given. And all these various perspectives of what you will look like when you achieve whatever it is that your dharma, all these ideas of who you will be and what it will be like and what it will feel like and how you will look out on the world, what enlightenment is before actually knowing what it is, who you are before really knowing what you are, is the basis of the 8 of Swords. It's the cage of ignorance more than anything else. One who doesn't even know their inner workings, one who doesn't even know their inner life, goes forth and says that they know the world when they know not even themselves. They are freed through the pain of introspection, but because they at least know that little that introspection causes that pain, they create this cage with the small knowledge that they have. And then we come to the 9. I say it sounding like I say it with glee, but it's not a happy card, as you can see. It's the 9 of Swords. In the Rider-Waite deck, it's portrayed by someone sitting up in their bed at night with their hands holding their face and these 9 swords, above their head, haunting them, keeping them up, not allowing their sleep. I've always viewed this card as as iron bars that we have to push ourselves through. I was diving a little deeper into that meditation just the other night, and I realized the only way to get through these bars is you're going to end up completely chopped up and destroyed by the time you get on the other side. And that makes sense because the next card is called Ruin, but we'll get to that in a moment. And, as you go through these swords, as you go through these iron bars, and you get chopped up into all kinds of pieces because you're analyzing and you're dissecting and you're cutting yourself apart to find the core of you, and you're finding all these aspects of yourself that you don't like, and that are ugly and scary and dark and evil even seeming, but you see them inside of you. That's the pain, that's the cruelty, that's where that word comes from. One of the common things I would often say when this card shows up in a reading is, the world can be cruel to you, you can be cruel to the world, but no one can be as cruel as they can be to themselves, because it's your own thoughts that really cause that pain and that suffering inside. Anyone could call anyone the worst name in the book, whatever that might be. It's just a string of letters put together to form words, and unless you allow those words to inflict pain and suffering and cruelty upon you, then they won't have any power whatsoever. And so all the power reverts back to the mind. And this card is really about that, how we have to take back that recognition that, we're not, we have to realize we're not the victim, that we're the ones who cause our own pain and suffering, that we need to let go of these false perspectives of self, even though we're comfortable in our self-image as found in the Eight of Swords. It's a lie. It's not true, it's an imagining, and parts of it might be true, but we have to really dissect and analyze and go within to know what it is that we really are. And we'll find in the end, especially after going through the difficulty of getting completely chopped up in the Nine of Swords, your whole being by the time you're out of this and the 10 and back to the Ace is renewed, is really renewed. Because that's what it is. Your mind, your inner self, your ego has to pass through this and like I said, come out new. I'm gonna hold on a sec, see if it catches up. Okay. I think that's, yeah, there we go. So that's the Nine of Swords. It's the death of the ego, and a lot of people can get stuck in this card for a long time because they won't use that introspection to further advance them towards the 10. Rather, they'll use that introspection just to become overly self-critical and negative, and they'll place more restrictions upon themselves. They'll create an exterior cage as well as the interior cage that they have. Until one realizes that they can free themselves from this cruelty by gaining a new perspective overall, one that doesn't use the mind as the seat of self, but rather the perceiver of the mind as the seat of self. Until one can have that realization through true experience, they will be stuck in this card for a very long time, because it requires the death of the ego to truly transcend this card and truly transcend the mind. One has to stop identifying with their thought process. Again, the mind is just a tool, and it's a tool that allows us to see the order and beauty in our creation. It allows us to, it's a reflection of that order and beauty, but it is taking control, and we need to find a way to return to the divine. I'm going to finish the sword suits in another video very quickly.